Vincent took in the sight before him, his gaze lingering on Brett Coleman. The confidence in Brett's eyes flickered for a split second when he recognized Vince. "You're Vince, right?" Brett asked, folding his arms with a forced bravado. "That's right," Vincent replied, not breaking eye contact. "And you are?" "Brett Coleman," he said, squaring his shoulders. "Lisa said—" "Yes, I heard what Lisa said." Vincent cut him off with a calm voice, though a storm brewed beneath the surface. "This is still my house." Kayla edged further into the hallway, clutching Lisa's robe tighter around her. "Maybe you should come back when Lisa's here," she muttered, glancing nervously at Brett. Vincent took a deliberate step inside, uninvited but undeterred. "I'll wait," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Brett shifted uncomfortably, eyeing the door as if he might try to usher Vincent out. Instead, Vince walked past him and glanced around the living room. It was cleaner than he'd ever seen it, the coffee table stacked with unfamiliar magazines, a faint scent of vanilla candles replacing the lemon air freshener Lisa used to prefer. "You redecorate, Brett? Or was that Lisa's idea?" Vince said with a half smile. Brett shrugged, clearly unnerved. I contributed." Kayla stepped away, heading toward the kitchen, pretending to busy herself with making coffee. Silence lingered, thick and uneasy. Vincent turned to Brett, his smile vanishing. "How long has this been going on?" Brett hesitated, then said, "Since last winter. Look, man, Lisa didn't know how to tell you, but—" Vince's chuckle was cold. "I figured out a lot in 8 months, Brett. I just wanted to see if either of you would have the courage to say it to my face." Brett opened his mouth to respond, but the sound of a car pulling into the driveway silenced him. Kayla peeked through the curtains, then turned to the group. "That's Lisa. She's home." Vince felt his heart pound in his chest. The moment he'd played out in his mind for months was finally here, and he was ready. He straightened his posture and prepared to meet his wife, determined to get the answers he deserved. Vincent's voice was steady, his tone leaving no room for refusal. "I need this done quickly, Maria, and I need to know if there's any connection to a company called St. Louis Security." Maria's voice was cautious. "St. Louis Security? That's Tommy's company, Vince. You know that." "I need to be sure," Vince replied, his grip tightening on the phone. "I need to know if they've been involved in anything unusual, anything that might explain why my life was turned upside down." Maria sighed. "All right, Vince, I'll get on it. But you owe me one. A big one." "I know," Vince said, hanging up the phone. He leaned against the cold metal wall of the storage unit, his mind racing. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but he needed more. He needed proof. He needed to know who had set him up and why. His next call was to an old contact in the St. Louis Police Department, Detective Henry Martinez. Henry had always been straight with Vince, even when it meant stepping on toes. "Henry, it's Vince Torres. I need a favor." Henry's gruff voice came through the line. "Vince, you're out? Good to hear. What do you need?" "I need access to the evidence from my case, the weapons trafficking charges. I need to see the original reports, the witness statements, everything." Henry hesitated. "Vince, you know I can't just hand over evidence. But I can tell you this. There were some irregularities in your case. Things that didn't add up. I always thought you were set up, but I couldn't prove it." Vincent felt a surge of adrenaline. "I need those files, Henry. I need to see the evidence for myself." Henry sighed. "All right, Vince. I'll see what I can do. But you owe me one." "I know," Vince replied, hanging up the phone. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. He had a long night ahead of him, poring over documents, cross-referencing names, and connecting dots. But he was ready. He was determined to uncover the truth, no matter how deep it buried, and to make those responsible pay for their betrayal. This was a coordinated effort, a carefully orchestrated betrayal that went far beyond a broken marriage. Vince could now see the pattern, a network of relationships and motivations that had been hiding in plain sight. He pinned a photo of Tommy at the center of the web. Executed with surgical precision, Tommy had manipulated Lisa and Brett, weaving them into his plans and making Vince the scapegoat. The false evidence, the tipped-off authorities, the conveniently recommended lawyer, all roads led back to Tommy Coleman. Vince's anger was cold and sharp, fueling his determination. He'd faced worse odds before. His training had taught him to operate in enemy territory, to outthink, outmaneuver, and survive. He gathered every bit of surveillance Maria sent, phone logs, financial records, security footage pulled through back channels. Patterns began to emerge, hush payments to unnamed accounts, late-night meetings between Tommy and a shadowy business partner from St. Louis security. Lisa's own spending habits had spiked after the indictment. Spa trips, shopping sprees, expensive dinners, all aligning with key dates from his case. By midnight, his plan was taking shape. This would be methodical, precise. He'd use Jerry's veterans for surveillance, crack the financials with Maria's help, and rely on David Kim to pry loose the names behind the prosecution's evidence. As the city lights of Riverside glowed outside his window, Vince felt something he hadn't felt in 8 months, a renewed sense of purpose. He was no longer just a victim of their scheme. He was a man on a mission. Vince let out a short, humorless laugh. "It's exactly what I think, Lisa. The lunches, the secret meetings, the life insurance policy you took out just before my arrest. Don't insult my intelligence." Lisa's lips parted in protest, but Vince held up a hand. "Save it. I know about the money transfers from Tommy to Brett. I know about the new insurance policy. What I want to know is, were you ever going to tell me, or was I supposed to die in prison and make everything easier for you?" She looked away, her eyes glassy with unshed tears. "I never wanted you to get hurt, Vincent. It just happened." He leaned forward, voice harsh but quiet. "People don't just start planning a life without their husband overnight. You and Brett, Tommy helping arrange it all. Why, Lisa? Was it just the money? Was it that easy to throw away everything we built?" Lisa swallowed hard, fidgeting with the pen on her desk. "It wasn't just about the money," she whispered. "You were never here, Vince. Always off working, always with your security contracts. I was lonely. And Tommy said, he said you were getting reckless, attracting attention that could bring all of us down." Vince's jaw clenched. "So you let them frame me. You let me rot in Millbrook for something I didn't do, while you played house with Brett." Lisa's voice shook. "I made mistakes, but it wasn't all me. Tommy wanted you gone, Vince. He said the business was at risk, that you were crossing lines even he couldn't protect. He promised me a fresh start, safe from all of it." He rose from his chair, his presence looming over the desk. "Consider this your only warning, Lisa. I'm not as easy to get rid of as you and Tommy thought. If I find out you had anything to do with the setup, you'll regret it. Now, tell Brett and Tommy, I'm back, and I'm not going anywhere." Lisa's only answer was the pale panic in her eyes as Vincent Torres turned and strode from the office, ready for the next move in the battle for his life. Vince gave a thin, almost pitying smile. "Relax, Rick. If I wanted to hurt you, I wouldn't be sitting here having a friendly chat." Polson tried to push himself upright, his movements sluggish and uncoordinated. I already talked to the cops, man. It's over. It's not over, Vince replied quietly. You set me up, Rick. You lied under oath, and I know Brett Coleman was the one who made it worth your while. Trouble is, your kind of secret has a way of eating at a man. That's why you drink yourself to sleep in a dump like this. Rick's hands fumbled for a cigarette, finally lighting one with shaking fingers. I had no choice, Vince. They said they'd make my life hell if I didn't go along. Brett said he'd take care of it. Just had to say what Tommy told me, and I'd be set. Set? Vince leaned forward, his eyes locked on Rick's face. You look anything but set, Rick. You look like a man running out of runway. Tell me, how far has Brett's care gotten you? Rick shifted uneasily, as if the question stayed with him longer than it should. I ain't got nothing left, man. The money's gone. The job was gone as soon as you got locked up. And now I hear you're out? Brett won't even take my calls. That's because, to them, you're just another tool, Vince replied. And now you're a liability. But for once, you get a choice. Help me, and maybe salvage what's left of your life. Or keep hiding and wait for them to cut you loose for good. Rick's gaze darted around the cluttered room, sweat beading on his forehead. What do you want from me? The truth, Vince said, voice soft but relentless. Proof of how they set me up, every detail. You help me. I'll make sure you don't end up taking the full fall when this comes crashing down. Polson took a long, shaky drag from his cigarette, then nodded, his face crumpling with resignation. All right, man. You get me out of town, get me somewhere safe, and I'll tell you everything. I got records, text messages, stuff I kept just in case. I ain't going back to prison. Vince stood, satisfied that the first of his enemies had cracked. You do your part, Rick, and you won't have to look over your shoulder again. I'll be in touch. He left the trailer with his heart pounding, not from fear, but from the thrill of the hunt. The first domino had fallen, and it would not be the last. Jerry's voice was crisp through the phone. Brett and Lisa are holed up at your old house. Brett just made calls to Tommy and left the property in a hurry. He looked scared, boss. Something spooked him bad. Stay on them, Vince instructed, eyes never leaving the restaurant's exit as Tommy sped away. Tommy Coleman is unraveling. We're going to keep the pressure on until he makes a mistake. Jerry chuckled. This is just like the old days, Vince. I almost feel sorry for them. Almost. Don't, Vince replied, a hard edge in his voice. They tried to end me, Jerry. We owe them nothing but the truth, delivered with interest. Hanging up, Vince checked his messages. Maria had sent a new file. Paul Hemmings, Tommy's accountant, had transferred large sums between shell companies, some with ties to St. Louis security. Things were moving quickly now. Alliances in Tommy's world were built on sand, and the tide was coming in. A shadow fell across Vince's table. Without turning, he knew who it was. Maria had a way of appearing when the stakes were highest. You started a wildfire, she said, sliding into the chair opposite him, laptop balanced on her knees. Tommy's accountant is trying to cover his tracks, but he's sloppy. I traced a wire transfer from a St. Louis security account to Hayes's campaign fund. That's federal prison, if you play it right. Vince finally allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. Keep pushing, Maria. Tonight, we hit them where it hurts, at their reputation and their freedom. Across the street, the sun had started to dip behind the buildings, casting long shadows over the city. The web Tommy Coleman had spent years weaving was starting to unravel, strand by strand, and Vince was the one pulling every single thread. If we make any move right now, it'll just bring more heat on us, Tommy insisted, voice taut with frustration. We didn't come this far just to panic and mess everything up. Lisa ran her hands through her hair, looking desperate. What if Rick turns on us? He's unstable. If he talks, everything unravels. Victor scoffed, glaring at her from across the coffee table. You should have found someone with more backbone. Weak men break fast. He looked at Tommy, eyes cold. If you want me to fix this, say so. I'm not squeamish. Brett's fists clenched, face turning red. No more violence. This isn't what I signed up for. I just wanted Vince out of the picture, not... You may not have a choice soon, Vince muttered into his headset, watching the live feed as his enemies argued. Every word convinced him that Victor was far more than a minor player. He was muscle, maybe even a hired fixer brought in for damage control. Jerry, listening beside him, nodded grimly. This is bigger than we thought, Vince. Organized crime, probably using Tommy's business and St. Louis security as fronts. Vince nodded, eyes narrowed as the audio continued. Tommy barked, "Everyone calm down. We act normal. No sudden moves, no spooking the feds. We control the narrative, just like before." Unless Vince controls it first, Jerry whispered, a hint of excitement in his tone. Across the security feed, Vince saw Lisa shiver and steal a glance at the dark windows. He's out there. I can feel it, she whispered, voice barely audible over the speakers. She was right. Vince was out there, and so was Justice. The time for waiting was over. The final moves were about to begin. Victor signaled his men to sweep the area, their footsteps echoing through the cavernous space. He approached the desk, eyes narrowed, and picked up the envelope. Inside, he found a stack of photographs, grainy surveillance shots showing his meetings with Tommy Coleman, Brett, and a few others whose faces were indistinct, but whose identities were all too clear to him. Paper-clipped to the top of the stack was a single sheet of paper with a typed message. You have two choices, Victor. Walk away and leave this town for good, or be the next name on the federal indictments list. Your business, your freedom, your life, all depend on what you decide tonight. This is your only warning. Victor's eyes flicked to the shadowy corners of the warehouse, as if expecting someone to materialize from the darkness. His hands trembled slightly, the envelope now feeling heavier in his grip. He knew a threat when he saw one, and the evidence inside the envelope was more than enough to bury him for the rest of his days. One of his men stepped forward, glancing at the photographs, his own face turning pale. Boss, what do we do? Victor said nothing at first, just stared at the evidence, a silent acknowledgement that somehow Vince Torres had turned the tables. We leave, Victor finally muttered, stuffing the envelope under his coat. No more Riverside, not for a long time. Start making calls. We're pulling out. Tonight. As Victor and his men slipped away into the early dawn, the trap Vince had set was already tightening. With the most dangerous piece removed from the board, Vince could focus on the true architects of his downfall, Tommy, Brett, and Lisa. Justice was coming for them, and it was closer than they could ever imagine. Vince met Victor's gaze with cold certainty. You don't. But here's the difference. I'm not asking for your trust, Victor. I'm giving you a choice. If you walk out with those folders and hand them to the federal agents, you might walk away with your freedom and a new identity. Refuse, and Tommy Coleman wins, and you'll rot while he walks free. I'm offering you a lifeline, not friendship. A siren wailed in the distance, growing louder by the second. Victor glanced again at the blinking cameras, his confidence draining away as he did the math. The men at his side began to mutter nervously. One even took a hesitant step toward the nearest exit, only to see flashing lights beginning to pour in from beneath the warehouse doors. Victor clenched his jaw. "You are a very dangerous man, Mr. Torres." Vince's smile was grim. "No, Victor. I'm just a man who refuses to be destroyed by other people's lies." Victor hesitated for one agonizing moment, then nodded. "I will give them what they want, but if you are lying to me, you'll know soon enough," Vince replied. "Walk out with those documents in your hand and say you want to speak to the lead federal agent. The rest will take care of itself." The pounding at the main entrance intensified as agents began shouting for everyone to come out with their hands raised. Victor tucked both folders under his arm, motioned to his men to follow, and moved toward the front as Vince melted back into the shadows, vanishing as quietly as he'd arrived. Moments later, the federal agents stormed inside, weapons drawn. But Victor, not Vince, greeted them, both hands full of evidence that would change the game forever. In the safety of his surveillance van nearby, Vince watched it all unfold on his tablet, knowing the last chess pieces were about to fall. Tommy's eyes darted around the room, as if searching for an escape. "You can't be here. I'll have you thrown out." Vince took a sip of his wine, unruffled. "Try it. I have a reservation, and I'm not breaking any laws. Besides, I thought you'd want to see me. After all, you've gone to so much trouble to make sure I was out of the picture." Tommy's jaw clenched, his fists tightening at his sides. "You're playing with fire, Vince. You don't know what you're getting into." Vince leaned back in his chair, his voice low and dangerous. "Oh, I think I do. You see, Tommy, I've had a lot of time to think. 8 months, to be exact, and I've come to realize that you and I have unfinished business." Tommy's face paled slightly, but he tried to bluster his way through it. "You're delusional. You have no proof of anything. You're just a bitter, convicted felon trying to cause trouble." Vince's smile was cold. "Am I? Then why is Victor Petrov wearing a wire right now, ready to sing like a canary to the feds? Why is Rick Polson prepared to testify against you and Brett? And why are the federal agents outside, waiting for my signal to come in and arrest you all?" Tommy's eyes widened in shock, and Vince could see the wheels turning in his mind as he tried to process the implications. "You're bluffing," Tommy said, but his voice lacked conviction. Vince shook his head. "I'm not, Tommy. The game is over. You lost. Now, you're going to do the right thing and confess to everything, or I can make things very, very difficult for you." Tommy's face contorted with rage and fear. "You can't do this to me. I have friends, powerful friends." Vince's voice was steady and unyielding. "Not anymore, you don't. Your friends are about to become your enemies, Tommy, and I'm going to make sure you spend the rest of your life paying for what you did to me." Tommy's shoulders slumped, the fight going out of him. "You can't win, Vince. You don't know who you're up against." Vince stood, buttoning his jacket. "I know exactly who I'm up against, Tommy, and I'm not afraid. You should be. Because tonight, your world ends, and mine begins again." With that, Vince turned and walked away, leaving Tommy Coleman standing alone in the dining room, his dreams of power and influence crumbling around him. As Vince stepped out into the cool night air, he knew that the final act was about to begin. The trap had been set, and the execution was at hand. Vince laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "You framed me, Lisa. You and Tommy and Brett. You stole my life, my freedom, my future, and now you're going to pay for it." Lisa's eyes widened in panic. You can't prove anything. It's just a bank statement. It doesn't mean anything. Vince leaned forward, his voice low and dangerous. It means everything, Lisa. It means that you were involved in a conspiracy to frame an innocent man. It means that you were willing to destroy someone's life for money and power. And it means that you're going to spend the rest of your life in prison for it. Lisa's face crumpled, and for a moment, Vince thought she might break down completely. But then, her expression hardened, and she straightened up, her voice shaking with rage. You think you've won, Vince? You think you've beaten us? You're wrong. You're so wrong. You don't know what you're up against. Vince's smile was cold. I know exactly what I'm up against, Lisa, and I'm not afraid. You should be, because tonight, your world ends, and mine begins again. Lisa's eyes flashed with hatred, and she turned and stormed out of the country club, leaving Vince alone at his table. As he watched her go, he knew that the final act was about to begin. The trap had been set, and the execution was at hand. He picked up his phone and sent a text to Jerry. Phase 4 is a go. Let the games begin. Tommy's voice, slurred with drink and panic, filled the room. We need to do something. We can't just sit here and wait for him to make his move. Victor, his voice steady and calm, replied, We need to stay calm, Tommy. We need to think this through. If we panic, we'll make mistakes. Tommy slammed his fist on the table, rattling the glasses. Mistakes? We've already made plenty of those. We should have handled this permanently from the start. Lisa's voice, shaking with fear, chimed in. We can't just kill him, Tommy. That's insane. We need to find another way. Tommy's laugh was bitter and harsh. Another way? There is no other way, Lisa. Vince knows too much. He's got evidence. He's got witnesses. He's got everything he needs to take us down. We have to stop him before he can use it. Victor's voice was low and dangerous. And how do you propose we do that, Tommy? We can't just disappear him. We can't just make him go away. He's too smart, too careful. He's already one step ahead of us. Tommy's voice dropped to a whisper, but the microphone picked up every word. Then we need to make sure he can't use that evidence. We need to make sure he can't testify. We need to make sure he can't do anything to hurt us. Lisa's gasp was audible. Tommy, no, we can't. It's too risky. It's too... Tommy cut her off, his voice cold and determined. It's the only way, Lisa. It's the only way we can be sure. We need to take him out, permanently. The room went silent for a moment, the weight of Tommy's words hanging heavy in the air. Then, Victor's voice, calm and measured. And how do you plan to do that, Tommy? How do you plan to make sure Vince Torres never sees the light of day again? Tommy's laugh was cold and calculating. I have my ways, Victor. I have my ways, and I'm not afraid to use them. Not anymore. Not after everything he's done to us. As the conversation continued, the federal agents listening in the van outside exchanged glances, their faces grim. They had enough to arrest Tommy, Brett, and Lisa on conspiracy charges. But with this confession, they had something even more powerful. A clear, recorded admission of intent to commit murder. The trap had been sprung, and the noose was tightening around Tommy Coleman's neck. Vince, watching from a safe distance, felt a sense of satisfaction wash over him. The game was almost over, and justice was about to be served. And now, he's coming for us, Tommy growled, letting the tension and fear poison his voice. But I won't let him win. No more loose ends, no more chances. If he gets close, we finish what we started. Victor's gaze flicked toward the flower arrangement in the center of the table. He tapped the hidden transmitter, ensuring the microphone caught every word. That's a big risk, Tommy. If the FBI already suspects us, one wrong move could bring everything down. I think we need to seriously reconsider." Tommy cut him off, slamming his fist down again. "You always did lack vision, Victor. This is my operation, my reputation. Nobody, especially Vincent Torres, destroys me." Through the dining room glass, the first flicker of blue and red lights carried through the night as the federal agents began to move. Hayes, usually calm, began to sweat. Wong's hand trembled as she reached for her purse. The entire atmosphere had shifted. Danger and defeat hung thick as a storm cloud. Brett finally cracked, running a shaking hand through his hair. "I didn't sign up for this, man. I just wanted the money, a clean slate. You promised me protection, Tommy." Tommy ignored him, his eyes darting from one partner to the next. "There is no protection unless we finish this tonight. Go home, sit tight, and if I call, drop everything and disappear. Or help me take Torres out of the picture for good." Victor watched Tommy, his expression blank, all the while making sure the FBI got every damning word. Lisa was pale with shock, her hands trembling as she stared at her soon-to-be ex-husband. Wong and Hayes exchanged glances, realizing, perhaps for the first time, they'd chosen the wrong side. Outside, tires screeched and doors slammed. The federal agents were ready. The end, at last, had arrived for Tommy Coleman and everyone in his rotten circle. Federal agents stormed the private dining room, hands on holsters, voices raised with authority. Tommy barely had time to process the sound of heavy boots thundering down the club's elegant corridor before the doors were flung open and the lights seemed to flicker with the chaos of justice descending. "Federal agents, no one move." A sea of law enforcement filled the room, stunning the assembled guests and freezing the conspirators in their seats. Tommy Coleman, Lisa Torres, Brett Coleman, Victor Petrov, you're all under arrest for conspiracy, racketeering, insurance fraud, perjury, and conspiracy to commit murder, a lead agent declared, voice steel bright in the lush room. Tommy opened his mouth to protest, but words failed him as agents snapped cuffs around his wrists. Brett slumped, eyes wide and glassy. Lisa broke, crumpling in tears, repeatedly muttering, "No, this can't be happening." Hayes and Wong pressed themselves against the wall in silent terror. Victor nodded as agents approached, stoic and resigned, maintaining his part of the bargain and ensuring the last threads of Tommy's empire unraveled. Every piece of the network that ruined Vince was now exposed to the full weight of federal prosecution. In the crisp midnight air outside, Vince Torres leaned against his car, watching the flashing lights paint the country club's grand facade red and blue. His chest was tight, with a complicated surge of relief and grim satisfaction. The 8 months he'd lost could never be returned, nor could the innocence so expertly stolen from him. But justice, finally, had come full circle. Tomorrow, every news outlet in the city would scream the downfall of Tommy Coleman and his conspirators. Families would grieve, fortunes would shatter, and power would shift. But for tonight, for the first time in years, Vincent Torres felt free. He drove away into the dark, ready to start a new chapter in a life reclaimed by truth and sharpened by the lessons of betrayal. The game was over, and Vincent had finally won. He sat quietly for a moment, absorbing the weight of it all. The years of hard work stolen, the months endured behind bars, the trust shattered. None of it could ever fully be put right. But seeing justice done brought a measure of peace he hadn't dared hope for. Agent Mitchell stood and extended her hand. "You built quite a case, Mr. Torres. The Bureau could use someone with your skills. Ever consider coming over to the good guys? Vince let a small, genuine smile cross his face for the first time in months. For now, I think I'll just enjoy my freedom. Maybe travel for a while. Eat good food, sleep through the night without looking over my shoulder. Mitchell grinned. You've earned it. As Vince left the FBI office and stepped into the pre-dawn stillness of the city, he felt the sharp, clean air fill his lungs. Above the buildings, the sky was beginning to brighten. A new day for a man who'd finally taken his life back. He drove home, passing scenes of quiet neighborhoods slowly waking. There was plenty still to fix. Trust would have to be rebuilt, wounds would need healing, and old doors might never open again. But none of that frightened him anymore. Vincent Torres had lost everything, but in fighting back, he'd discovered something greater: resilience, clarity, and true strength. Justice had been served, not just in the courts, but in his own soul. He parked in front of a quiet house he'd rented under his true name at last. As the sun broke through the horizon, painting the world gold, Vince allowed himself to hope, really hope, for the future. And this time, he would build it on his own terms. As the city faded in his rearview mirror, Vince let the past drift further behind with each passing mile. He didn't need to look back. There was nothing left for him in the world of Tommy Coleman and all those who'd helped orchestrate his downfall. What mattered now was the horizon ahead, promising the start of a life reclaimed by integrity and resilience. Days turned into weeks, and Vince quietly settled into new routines. He reconnected with old friends, made amends where he could, and even allowed himself moments of happiness. Simple breakfasts in sunlit kitchens, afternoons spent at the gym, evenings reading in parks where no one knew his story. He'd been given another chance, not just by the courts, but by fate itself. The scars of betrayal remained, etched into his heart as reminders to trust wisely, to cherish loyalty, and to never compromise his principles again. Vincent Torres moved forward, cautiously hopeful, forever changed, but free at last. The future, unburdened by the darkness behind him, stretched before him like the dawn after a long and stormy night. And with every step, he was determined to walk it as his own man, stronger, wiser, and never to be broken again. Tommy Coleman, Lisa Torres, and Brett Coleman would spend the next decade or more in prison, their lives wrecked by their own greed and cruelty. Every day behind bars would serve as a reminder of the man they'd underestimated, the trap they'd walked into, and the high price of betrayal, especially against someone whose resolve was forged in hardship and who never forgot nor forgave. Vincent Torres got his life back. His enemies paid the ultimate price for their treachery. In the end, for Vince, that was justice enough. With the past finally laid to rest, Vince stepped confidently into a future of his own making, a life reclaimed, stronger and wiser. Justice had been served, and this chapter of his story, at last, was closed.